The pandemic has devastated the global travel and tourism industry. No sector has suffered more. And no region has fared worse than Europe, where revenues were down almost 50% in 2020. This year, many cities are eagerly trying to win back visitors, yet they face stiff competition from the great outdoors and ongoing international restrictions on travel. So will tourism ever recover? The arrival of summer to the Northern Hemisphere brought great hope to tourist destinations. Finally, a chance to make some money after a lost season in 2020. But the coronavirus pandemic still hangs over the sector, making a return to normal still elusive. We report from Paris.
Paris loves its tourists. That's the message these young multilingual ambassadors are trying to spread. Tourists shouldn't hesitate and just come to Paris. We'll help them find their bearings here at the Centre Pompidou and all the other sites. Paris is such a pleasant city and there are more and more of us to help visitors. Doing this makes me happy. Up to 500 of them will be deployed this year in an effort to kickstart tourism again, after visitor numbers plummeted by 2/3 last year. But the tourists who normally represent a large share of the city's visitors, people from Asia and the US, might be a bit longer in coming. We would like everybody to come back to Paris, but we are obviously aware that French and European tourists are likely to be the first ones back, as it's still easier for them to travel. Many hotels are trying to lure in the locals with special deals, with some luxury establishments offering discounts of up to 70%. But no offer will convince those already desperate to get out of the city. This French couple have chosen to go to higher ground, 50 kilometers north of the French capital. With this pandemic, people have understood that they needed to disconnect from reality. Such special offers aren't necessarily so important for me. We need to breathe and take a step back from work, especially as we've all been working from home for quite a while now. They are not the only ones who feel the urge to get out of the city bubble. Reservations at these cabins have skyrocketed. It's like people have flipped since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis and realized that they needed nature to reconnect to who they are. We can't keep up with demand and are now planning to construct an additional 5 cabins by the end of next year. And yet, some might argue this is exactly the right time to visit Paris or other cities. Here at the Louvre, the world's biggest museum, foreigners make up 3/4 of visitors. But due to COVID-19 restrictions, many of these visitors from abroad are not showing up. That's why you can now even get tickets at short notice and visit world-famous works of art almost by yourself. What's true for the Louvre is true for other sites in the French capital. You no longer have to queue for hours. And that might be the most appealing tourist attraction of all.
Well, we can now speak to Freya Higgins de Biol, who is a senior lecturer in tourism at the University of South Australia. Thanks for joining us on the COVID-19 special. It's hard to overstate the size of the impact of the pandemic on tourism, isn't it?
It really is. These are extraordinary times, and for people who have been through lockdown and repeated lockdowns, it's been so difficult. And then trying to get that balance right between dealing with public health, extraordinary public health situation, and keeping the economy going or trying to get tourism revived, it's really extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah, so what are the main obstacles in the way of tourism getting back to normal?
Well, we've never had a shutdown like this for a global tourism system. So the difficulties have to do with managing public health, and we're finding some very good approaches, particularly in Europe, with things like the digital COVID certificate, which is going to enable European-wide travel, trying to get mass vaccinations out, and then measures with dealing with possibilities of difficulties, so using contact tracing and so on. But the system has actually been run down. So, for instance, our aviation system now is in disarray because planes have been put in storage, basically, because our aviation circuits are all shut down. The cruise industry has been absolutely crippled by these events and is just now trying to wind back up. So it's extraordinarily difficult to ramp up things again.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big obstacles, as you mentioned, is the potential spreading of coronavirus and variants of it. And it has countries in this sort of limbo of loosening and then tightening restrictions. We've seen a lot of that in Europe around the Delta variant at the moment. Is there a danger of people losing all confidence in any holiday that they book?
Well, people who are more worried and careful are going to find it very difficult, and it will probably be a couple of years before we see confidence in travel occurring again. There will be those who are adventuresome and won't worry about these difficulties and will be flexible. But, following stereotypes, that tends to be the young. And in some countries, we're not seeing the vaccine rolled out quickly to the young. It's the elderly and the people with health problems who are getting the vaccinations first. So there's also that aspect to getting things rolling again. I know that a lot of young people are really not used to this lack of freedom that they're experiencing, and they're really chomping at the bit to get out and experience travel. So yes, it's amazing how we're having to be patient. We're having to wait and see how things unfold. And I've just learned in the news today that some Israelis who were vaccinated have caught COVID. So we don't know how the various vaccinations are going to provide immunity, for how long, all of those things. So there's a lot of moving parts to this difficulty that we're in. And the use of travel bubbles or travel circuits is one way that we're getting tourism, travel, accommodations, and all of that going again. So Europe will definitely be one of the cases of seeing how things go and how we can get things successful again. Yeah.
You mentioned about how some people are just desperate to get out there and travel again. Is there a flip side to that? And that there are maybe now people who have taken a liking to travelling within the countries in which they already live, and that international tourism may not get back to the position that it was before?
Well, it would seem that we're in an era of really profound change, and I don't think the travel we knew before will come back the way it was before. We took cheap travel for granted, and we thought that we could go anywhere we wanted, just on whims and for very inexpensive, very easy sort of holidays. And it's likely that travel will be more expensive. For the next few years, it's probably not going to be as convenient because there won't be so many routes to travel or so many ease of scheduling to happen. And we have to be ready, for instance, for things like quarantine measures to be put in place for perhaps another year or so. So those difficulties are likely to remain. We will see, I think, the term I would use is a localization of travel, a narrowing of travel circuits, and even people wanting to know their home countries. Sometimes we take our home country for granted and we want to travel to other places for the difference, for the exoticism and so on.
Sure.
So I think that we will find this more narrow circuits.
All right. Freya Higgins-de Biol from University of South Australia. Thanks for joining us on the COVID-19 special.
Thank you so much.
And now it's the part of the programme where we put one of your questions to our science correspondent, Derek Williams.
Do I have to have been given vaccines approved in Europe to come to Europe?
Guidelines for traveling to and within the European Union this summer are a work in progress, and they're likely to remain pretty chaotic for a while. That's because member state governments actually make their own rules, so they vary from country to country. In other words, what the French authorities or the German authorities demand that could differ in key ways from what, for instance, the Spanish authorities demand or the Greek authorities demand. The EU as a whole is still trying to get its ducks in a row when it comes to travel, and the launch of a new joint digital certificate for people who have been vaccinated or recently tested or who have recovered from COVID-19, it should help. But for the moment, that certificate is still largely really aimed at streamlining cross-border travel for people within Europe, and a lot less so for travelers from third countries. However, according to an official fact sheet on the digital vaccine passport, member states only have to allow free movement for those who have been fully vaccinated with one of the 4 vaccines currently authorized by the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, although it does add that member states may also decide to extend the privilege to travelers who've received other vaccines. But a lot of EU countries won't do that, at least at first. So if you want to travel to Europe from outside the bloc, but you haven't been fully vaccinated with either Pfizer-BioNTech or AstraZeneca or Moderna or Johnson & Johnson vaccines, you definitely need to check to see what the restrictions are in the countries that you want to visit, because in many cases, even full vaccination might not be recognized if it wasn't with a vaccine approved by the EMA.
And that's all from this COVID-19 special. Until next time, goodbye and take care.